Good afternoon. My name's Jim Wilson. I am the CEO of ZEA Biosciences. And today we're going to be talking about new innovations in plant biologics. Before we start talking about plant biologics, I want to kind of give you kind of a small history. What are biologics and why are they so important? Biologics are the next generation of drug discovery. Specifically, they are therapeutic proteins in some cases. These, think of it this way, they are proteins that help our body with cancer, with our immune system, with diabetes, with hypertension. They're actually, they're part of organisms that help us with drug development. What's interesting about biologics is that 2% of the drugs in this country are biologics, but they make up 40% of the drug spending. And 7 of the 8 top-selling drugs in the world are biologics. You might be aware of the #1 biologic is Humira for arthritis. There are 2 ways to make biologic drugs. One is from animal cells. The second is from plant cells. 99.999% of the biologic drugs in the world today are made from animal cells. And the reason for that is they have high reproducibility and low variability. Now, just hang on to those 2 things, high reproducibility and low variability, because we're going to be talking about that here in a little bit. To give you a perspective on why this is so interesting is the market size for biologics going forward is almost going to be $400 billion by 2025. And it's predicted that plant biologics, botanical and plant-made drugs, are going to be about $39 billion by 2022. So this is an interesting market. The biologics market is growing extremely quickly. It is addressing chronic diseases like diabetes, like hypertension. There are, according to one association, there are over 900 biologics in research and development right now. And this is the most important thing. $58 billion has been sunk into biologics development. And that's actually amazing considering it's not even a $400 billion market yet. But there's a problem. And the problem is that with the rising demand for these biologics from animal cells, they're very expensive and they have limited scalability on what they do. And to give you even more why they're expensive, drug development path to this is research and development to a test facility to full-scale production. And there is, in animal cell biologics, there is this predictable path that if I can test something in a lab, I can build a small manufacturing plant to the point of where I can scale that. The challenges in plant biologics is that when you can do it in animal production, you can't do it in plant production. That it's very hard to develop a plant #1 is the same as plant number 1 million. But what's interesting is that there is an opportunity now that plants have been able to develop these proteins, and with, I'm going to use some fancy words, glycoengineering, downstream processing, plant expression vectors. Basic to say that there are a lot of plant biologics out there that are being put into play to address diseases like hypertension, like diabetes. And here's the key thing, folks. The key thing is that, remember I told you that the key factor was that there is a path to predictability. And that path to predictability with animal-based biologics is in the billions of dollars. Plant-based biologics are 1/10 the cost and about 1/10 the time to develop. That's what makes them so interesting. So a lot of new technologies have moved out there and have put them on an equal scale as animal biologics at 1/10 the cost. So how do we know that plant biologics are really moving ahead? Well, we see that $58 billion number of R&D being put into it. But more importantly, what we see if you come down to here is a research articles. And in 2013, there were 263 research articles concerning commercialization of plant biologics. The number actually in 2005 was 0, 2013, 263, 2018, 382. More importantly, this 2019, over 600. So again, if you look at that path to predictability, which is right here, of R&D lab, you're seeing a huge amount of research spent in plant biologics. And what's the drivers of that? Well, it's very simple. If I can produce a drug at 1/10 the cost, 1/10 the time, and scale it quicker with that same path of predictability, I'm going to do that. And with the driving, the cost of the consumer driving down prescription costs, this is the biggest market out there right now. So the key takeaways that I'd like to talk to you about is that plant biologics are the next generation of medicine. They are reproducible. That is, there are technologies out there that plant number 1 and plant number 1 million are exactly the same, so that because they have high reproducibility and low variability, they're comparable to animal biologics, and they're 1/10 the cost. There is that predictability, and that's why we believe this new innovation, which is leading a revolution. There are multiple research institutions, 3 that I know of personally, that are really developing a number of drugs that 5 years ago you couldn't do, 10 years ago you couldn't do. Today, these researchers are doing those drugs right now. And the time it takes for them to get approval by the FDA, which would have taken 11 to 12 years, is being shortened down to 3 to 4 to 5 years. And so we see this happening quite a bit, not just in our company, but there are roughly a number of companies out there that have significantly grown over the last couple of years because of this research that's being developed around the world. So I wanted to go ahead and answer some questions some people might have. I do have a couple right here that were asked to me. What are the estimated costs for scaling a plant biologics operation? And that really depends on a number of things. But we can say this. From the R&D test bench to a test facility in an animal cell biologic path would run anywhere from $300 million to $1 billion. And that's a risk somebody takes, and you have a 1 out of 8 chance that that drug would make it through the pipeline. In a plant-based biologic path, you're only spending about a tenth of that. You're really only going to spend $10 to $20 million because plant number one is the same as plant number 1 million, and there is a linear path to scale. So the estimated costs, pick a chronic disease, find out how much it costs to build the manufacturing plant, and divide that by a factor of 10, and that's about what you'll see in a plant biologics operation. The second thing is, what are the market projections for plant biologics in the future? Well, in one of the research in my in the PowerPoint deck, we said it was a $39 billion business for botanical and plant-based biologics. I've read studies in other places where it's 25 billion, 40 billion. It really is not so much the number as it is the growth. The typical demographic of the millennials and Gen Zers driving naturals, driving an environmental friendly drug environment is driving that research to drive down cost and produce something that's natural for the body. So those are the two questions I have, and I can open it up to any other questions you might have. Before we leave, I will say that if you email us to info@zeabio.com, I will email you a copy of the slide deck and make sure that you get a copy of this webinar also. First question was, how much do plant biologics work for international restrictions on plants being imported? That's a good question. The plant biologics we're talking about are not necessarily the ones that most people think. You just don't grow a plant and say, I want to extract this protein out of it. Most plants that you are growing are genetically modified to express, the word is to make more of some protein. So they are genetically modified plants. So the variation is, when you ask, I think the question that was asked is, how do plant biologics work for international restrictions? That's going to vary country to country. That's going to vary on what type of plant that you bring in. But there is definitely, in the United States, there are heavy restrictions on moving plants around that are genetically modified. That's one of them. The second question I have is, which plants are good for plant biologics? We've seen all kinds of plants out there: lettuce, switchgrass, duckweed, basil. Quite frankly, any type of plant. The beautiful thing about Mother Earth is that she has given us so many different varieties that have so many unique proteins. And I just read a research article. The percentage of the plant species on this earth that has been researched is about 1.5%. That is, of all plants on planet Earth, only about 1.5% of those plant species have been examined, researched, and cataloged. If that tells you the amount of opportunity there is to find cures for chronic diseases. Is DNA of the plant used as a protein host replicated easily? Off topic, that's an extremely technical question, and the answer is it replicated easily? No, it's not replicated easily. There's a lot of R&D and a lot of work that goes into modifying a plant to get it to do something that it doesn't normally do. And so, no, it's not easily replicated. But once that you've figured out how to replicate it, repeating that is fairly easy. How long does a plant protein last on a growing plant? Varies on the plant, varies on the growing conditions, varies on what type of protein you're talking about. You may be looking at 2 different expression proteins in a plant, and so there's a whole host of factors that go into how long those proteins stay in a plant. Believe it or not, you have a little plant, it starts growing, you might have the percentage of protein in the plant is very high at one point, and then as the plant gets bigger, you would think there'd be more protein, but believe it or not, the plant is doing something it's not normally doing. It's a manufacturing plant, but it's too big, so then what happens is the plant starts rejecting that protein in the plant, so that there is a kind of optimal time, an optimal harvest, so to speak, to get the maximum amount of protein out of the plant. Has ZEA been able to replicate a plant protein? We don't discuss, this is not a ZEA conversation, and we wouldn't discuss the inner workings of our company. This is a webinar to explain about the innovations in plant biologics. But if the person would like to learn more about us offline, we'd be more than happy to talk to them offline. So I see there's a number of other questions, but I did promise to keep this short and under 20 minutes. I will provide the deck. Follow, if you really want to understand where we are as a company or what we do with plant biologics. We are the world's most experienced plant biologics company out there. And follow us, or follow me on LinkedIn, definitely, and follow our company on LinkedIn. And there's plenty of videos, there's plenty of things. And again, the email is info, I-N-F-O, at zeabio.com. Thank you for your time, and thank you for attending this webinar.